The Galactic Council's chamber hummed with an uneasy tension as the elder delegate of the Varan species rose from his seat. His eyes, old as centuries, swept across the assembly, pausing on each delegation before he spoke. His voice was low but carried the weight of history. He recounted incidents buried in classified archives, the disappearance of the Ilari expeditionary fleet after trespassing into Sol System's edge, the unexplained annihilation of pirate armadas that had preyed on human colonies, and the black box recordings of battles fought in total silence where human vessels appeared and vanished without trace. His message was stark: leave Earth untouched. Do not provoke their kind. He spoke not as a politician but as a survivor. Long ago, his own fleet had tested human resolve. He had been one of the few to escape. In his words, humans were not a species that fought for conquest. They fought only when the line was crossed, and when it was, they fought until nothing remained of their enemy's will or capacity to strike again. This was not rumor. It was an observed fact, and it had been consistent through every recorded conflict. Yet around the hall, amusement flickered in the eyes of several delegates. To them, this was an overblown myth about a young, scattered race barely a century into interstellar travel. One delegate from the ZYTH Dominion chuckled openly, a deep, guttural laugh that echoed through the chamber. "Primitive fire throwers," he said, his translator rendering the contempt perfectly. "Their fleets number in the dozens, their worlds in the single digits. Their weapons are obsolete. They have no voice here." Murmurs of agreement followed from his allies. They saw in humanity an easy resource grab, rich mineral belts, fertile worlds, a species too small to stand against the weight of an empire. The elder's gaze did not waver. He repeated the warning, this time slower, as if etching it into the air itself. "Your fleets will burn in silence. Your soldiers will vanish in the dark. And by the time you understand the nature of what you have provoked, it will be too late to stop it." The hall fell still for a moment, but arrogance is a stubborn armor. The ZYTH delegation leaned back in their seats, already calculating invasion timetables. A few neutral observers exchanged worried glances. They had studied the fragments of human history that escaped censorship, battles on Earth fought against overwhelming numbers, wars won not by superior numbers but by relentless adaptation and an ability to weaponize even desperation. They saw patterns in the Council's scattered reports, sudden leaps in military technology without warning, warships appearing years ahead of predicted development schedules, unconventional tactics that left enemies baffled and broken. Still, none of them spoke aloud. In galactic politics, survival often meant silence. When the session adjourned, the Council's decision was nothing more than a vague recommendation to monitor human activity. It was a dismissal, not a defense. The elder Varan lingered for a moment in the emptying hall, watching the ZYTH delegation depart with the casual swagger of predators certain of their next meal. He knew that look. He had once worn it himself, before it had been burned out of him by the cold, surgical violence of human retaliation. Outside the chamber, the galaxy's information nets were already abuzz. ZYTH military planners leaked hints of a special operation to expand their borders. Propaganda ministers described the humans as isolated islanders in a sea of stars, ripe for assimilation. Recruitment drives spiked, fueled by promises of quick victory and rich spoils. Few paid attention to the buried reports of missing reconnaissance drones near human space or the increasing jamming of long-range scans in Sol's direction. In a dim corridor far from the council floor, an intelligence operative from the Rilkar Confederacy closed her data slate, having recorded every word. Her masters had no intention of warning humanity. They would watch, measure, and wait to see if the myths were real. If they were, better to let the ZYTH bleed first and learn from their mistakes. The elder Varan departed alone, his steps slow, his thoughts heavy. He had seen what came next often enough to imagine it in precise detail: the first incursions, the probing attacks, the initial human withdrawals that looked like retreats. And then the shift. The silence before the strike. The moment when the hunters realized they were being hunted. He could only hope, faintly, that the galaxy would understand before it was too late. But he knew the truth. They would not. They never did. The ZYTH Dominion's decision came swiftly after the Council's session. Their war cabinet met in a private chamber aboard the Imperial flagship, charts of human territory projected in shimmering red. Analysts presented estimates of minimal resistance, a handful of outdated fleets, scattered colonies, and planetary defenses that, by ZYTH standards, were little more than ceremonial. The High Marshal dismissed any thought of diplomacy. The plan was to strike quickly, seize Earth and its colonies before the Council could intervene, and secure the mineral-rich systems around Sol for the Dominion's industrial machine. War preparations were a spectacle of confidence. Dockyards lit up with the constant glow of refit operations. Hundreds of warships, from sleek destroyers to massive dreadnoughts, were brought to full combat readiness. Merchant convoys were repurposed into supply trains to feed the invasion armada. On ZYTH news feeds, polished broadcasts portrayed humans as backward settlers living in fragile domes, incapable of resisting an organized force. Citizens cheered, convinced they were witnessing the start of an easy conquest that would swell the Dominion's wealth and prestige. Behind the bravado, there was no attempt to study the warnings given at the Council. Intelligence officers who voiced concerns were ignored or reassigned. Records of past encounters with humanity, the skirmishes, the unexplained losses, were dismissed as anomalies. The leadership believed their superiority in numbers and firepower would overwhelm any resistance. Their confidence was absolute. In human space, the reaction was the opposite of theatrical. In a secure meeting of Earth's highest leadership, there were no public speeches, no dramatic posturing. Orders were issued in clipped tones, and preparations began in silence. Military commands activated contingency protocols designed decades ago, long before humans had even met the ZYTH. Civilian traffic was rerouted away from potential combat zones. Colonial outposts that lay in the projected path of the invasion went dark, their inhabitants relocated without public announcement. The Dominion spies interpreted the sudden quiet as a sign of disorganization and weakness. It was exactly what human command intended. Defense fleets shifted position under encrypted orders, but not to meet the ZYTH head-on. Instead, they vanished into the deeper reaches of their systems, slipping into hidden positions where they could not be detected by standard scans. Strategic stockpiles of munitions were moved to unmarked locations. Orbital stations were evacuated and left seemingly abandoned, their sensor arrays reprogrammed to broadcast misleading data. Every move was calculated to feed the illusion of retreat. The ZYTH invasion force crossed into human-controlled space with banners raised and weapons armed, expecting an immediate confrontation. What they found was empty sky. Stations they had marked for capture floated lifeless, docking bays open and deserted. Colonies they anticipated storming were silent, with no transmissions and no visible inhabitants. They took worlds without firing a shot, declaring victory after each easy seizure, broadcasting the news back to their homeworld as proof of human frailty. Yet unease began to grow among their lower officers. Patrols sent to map human space disappeared without returning. Long-range sensors reported strange fluctuations in nearby asteroid fields. Entire supply ships dropped from the fleet's locator network, gone without distress signals. Commanders attributed it to mechanical failure or navigational errors, unwilling to believe it could be the work of an enemy they had yet to encounter. Within the Dominion's War Council, these incidents were noted but not prioritized. The offensive schedule was too important, and the momentum too intoxicating to slow. They ordered the fleets deeper into human territory, convinced they were pushing against a crumbling defense. Each step forward, however, pulled them further from their own supply lines, stretching their logistics and isolating them from reinforcements. By the third week of the campaign, the invasion force was spread thin across multiple systems. Communications between fleets grew intermittent, as if the void itself was swallowing their signals. Some commanders began to request regrouping, but their superiors dismissed it as cowardice. The orders were clear: advance to Earth. In the darkness between stars, the humans waited, patient and silent. The first sign that something had shifted came without warning. A ZYTH forward carrier, moving ahead of the main fleet to scout the next jump point, failed to report in. Its escort destroyers attempted to trace its path, but their drives cut out mid-transit, leaving them adrift in a lightless region of space. Rescue ships sent to recover them vanished in turn. No wreckage, no transmissions, only silence. At first, Command assumed navigational hazards or natural anomalies, but the pattern grew too precise to ignore. Every route the ZYTH used for reconnaissance began to close behind them as if invisible hands were sealing the paths. Then the system started failing. Entire squadrons found their targeting arrays locked in diagnostic loops that refused to end. Navigation computers displayed coordinates that did not match visible stars. Fuel reserves began draining faster than calculated, supply ships arrived empty, and food shipments were spoiled by environmental control malfunctions. Across the fleet, officers argued with engineers, certain the failures were sabotage, though none could explain how it was being done. Within the Dominion's command flagship, tension rose. Messages from rearguard fleets grew sporadic, often arriving corrupted or out of order. In some cases, weak-souled transmissions suddenly appeared, long after the fleets they referenced had been lost. Reports from surviving patrols spoke of shadowed shapes crossing their paths, vessels without any detectable drive signatures. They never stayed in sight long enough to engage, and when pursuit was attempted, the pursuers simply failed to return. Human tactics emerged not in grand assaults but in calculated strikes meant to destabilize. Fuel depots taken from human colonies erupted without warning, their storage tanks rigged to detonate on a timer. Sensor buoys left in apparently abandoned space transmitted false star maps, sending ZYTH ships into barren sectors far from their intended objectives. Automated messages began appearing on Dominion comm channels, short bursts in flawless ZYTH language. *. You are not alone. *. No source could be traced, no emitter found. Veteran ZYTH captains began to realize the humans had never been fleeing. They had been drawing the fleet forward, step by step, into regions the Dominion did not understand. Supply routes were now so long that relief convoys were vulnerable to interception, and something was already intercepting them. Unexplained flashes lit the dark near asteroid belts, and the convoys failed to arrive. The Dominion's logistic officers, faced with dwindling resources, requested immediate halts in the offensive to consolidate positions. High Command refused, insisting momentum would prevent human counterattacks. But momentum had already shifted. Inside the ZYTH fleet, morale began to fracture. Rumors spread among crew that humans could see their every move, that the void itself belonged to them. Deckhands spoke of hearing human voices in static, whispering coordinates or names. Gun crews swore they had locked onto enemy ships only to watch them dissolve into nothing before weapons fired. Every unexplained event deepened the unease, and every reassured dismissal from command sounded weaker than the last. The humans escalated their psychological assault. Captured Dominion transmissions were altered and rebroadcast across the invasion fleet, messages from ZYTH officers begging for extraction, overlaid with the sound of approaching weapons fire. None of those officers were ever found. Images appeared on private datapads of ZYTH soldiers asleep in their quarters, taken from angles inside the room, though no breach had been recorded. No demands, no ultimatums, no diplomacy. Just the creeping certainty that the enemy could be anywhere. When the first major engagement finally came, it was nothing like the ZYTH had expected. A rearguard formation guarding their supply chain was found in pieces, ships drifting in precise geometric patterns, their hulls marked with deep scorches but otherwise intact. There were no survivors, no signs of resistance, and no evidence of boarding. The Dominion's admirals tried to keep the discovery contained, but word spread through the fleet within hours. By then, it was too late to reverse course. The Dominion's formations were pulled deeper into unfamiliar sectors, navigation increasingly unreliable, fuel dwindling, crews on edge. What had started as an unstoppable advance was now a slow march into uncertainty. And in that uncertainty, the humans moved unseen, tightening the net. It began without prelude. The ZYTH fleet, drawn together in a desperate attempt to consolidate their scattered forces, emerged from their final jump expecting to find an empty staging sector. Instead, the blackness ahead rippled, and shapes materialized from the void. Hundreds of ships slid out of the dark, their silhouettes angular and unfamiliar. Hulls bore no identifying markings, their surfaces matte to swallow starlight. No drive signatures registered on Dominion sensors until the humans wanted them to. The first volley came with surgical precision. Lances of coherent energy tore through the lead ZYTH battleships, cutting clean lines through armor designed to withstand asteroid impacts. Missiles streaked from seemingly empty space, striking supply vessels before they could even attempt evasive maneuvers. Communications collapsed instantly as jamming flooded every channel, the Dominion's own fleet chatter replaced by bursts of human code they could not decrypt. Their admirals screamed orders, but the commands died in the static. Human warships moved like predators, never staying in direct confrontation for more than seconds. They would strike, vanish into stealth, and reappear at angles the Dominion could not anticipate. Every time the ZYTH tried to regroup, another formation was flanked, its ships reduced to drifting wrecks. The Dominion's numerical advantage meant nothing when their formations dissolved under constant disruption. Their heavy carriers, the pride of their navy, were targeted with eerie priority, not destroyed outright, but crippled and left helpless, their fighter bays gutted and engines dead. The battle spread across the sector in layers. From the edges of asteroid fields, hidden batteries opened fire, striking targets marked by distant human scouts. From behind barren moons, vessels once thought to be derelict lit their drives and joined the assault. In some cases, ships the ZYTH had claimed as prizes earlier in the war reappeared, stripped, refitted, and bristling with human weapons. Even the captured orbital platforms they had once used to declare victory now turned against them, their systems remotely seized and reprogrammed. Attempts to counterattack failed before they began. Dominion targeting systems, already plagued by earlier sabotage, struggled to lock onto human ships that emitted only ghost signatures. Long-range weapons fired into empty coordinates, guided by false sensor readings planted by the enemy. In the chaos, friendly fire incidents erupted, adding to the disorder. ZYTH discipline fractured under the relentless pace, officers making independent retreats without orders, only to find themselves intercepted by unseen pursuers. On the Dominion's primary command vessel, the High Marshal realized too late the depth of their miscalculation. The humans had allowed them to advance this far not out of weakness, but to ensure every escape route was closed. Now, every possible vector out of the system was covered by human forces, and every jump corridor calibrated to force ZYTH ships into ambush zones. Even emergency hyperspace jumps risked emergence into hostile traps. In planetary orbit over one of the Dominion's forward staging worlds, a new phase began. Human fleets split, with half pressing the space assault while others descended toward the surface. Military installations were dismantled in minutes, command centers rendered inoperable, fuel depots erased in precision blasts that spared civilian structures but left the planet militarily inert. The message was clear: this was not conquest for territory. It was removal of the Dominion's ability to ever project force again. Midway through the engagement, a single human transmission cut through the jamming. It was directed to the Dominion's Central Command, translated perfectly into their language. Asterisk. You were warned. This ends on our terms. Asterisk. The voice carried no rage, no triumph, only certainty. Then the assault intensified. By the time the Dominion attempted a coordinated withdrawal, it was no longer possible. The humans closed in from all sides, their ships forming a tightening wall of fire. One by one, the largest ZYTH vessels were reduced to fragments. Smaller craft fled blindly, only to be hunted down in the shadowed lanes between planets. Hours later, silence reclaimed the sector, broken only by the drifting hulks of a once proud fleet. And above the ruins of their war effort, the human ships remained in quiet formation, as if daring any survivor to try again. The Dominion's surrender came in fragments. Isolated transmissions from scattered survivors pleaded for ceasefire, some barely coherent through damaged comms. The humans acknowledged none of them directly. Instead, they broadcast a single directive across all open frequencies. All Dominion forces were to power down weapons, shut down drives, and await boarding. Compliance was total. Those who hesitated found their systems remotely disabled within minutes. No threats were issued, the outcome was already decided. On the Dominion's homeworld, panic rippled through the halls of governance. The Emperor's War Council had been reduced to silence, their fleets gone, their outer defenses bypassed as if they were irrelevant. When the human ships arrived in orbit, they did not posture or demand tribute. They deployed with mechanical precision, targeting every military installation, orbital guns, deep space sensors, shipyards, and rendering them inoperative without striking civilian centers. In hours, the Dominion's centuries-old war infrastructure was dismantled, not by brute force, but by deliberate excision, leaving the Empire's territory exposed yet untouched. This restraint unsettled the Dominion far more than devastation would have. The humans did not take planets, did not occupy cities, did not declare themselves rulers. They stripped the Dominion's ability to wage war and then simply left, vanishing into the dark in the same way they had arrived. Worlds once buzzing with military traffic now sat under empty skies, their fleets reduced to silent wreckage scattered in the void. The absence of conquest carried a heavier weight than occupation. It was not victory for resources, but a lesson carved deep into the Dominion's identity. In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Council convened to address the unprecedented collapse. The elder Varen, whose warning had been dismissed so openly, spoke again. This time, no delegate laughed. His account was entered into the historical record, alongside captured footage of the battle and the aftermath. Human ships emerging from nowhere, fleets evaporating under precision strikes, planetary strongholds neutralized without collateral destruction. It became required study material in every academy that trained officers or strategists. The closing words of his address, "Ignore the humans at your peril," were etched into the Council's archives, not as advice, but as law. For the Dominion, recovery was slow and humiliating. Their once mighty fleets were reduced to a fraction of their former number. Shipyards stood silent, lacking both resources and the expertise to rebuild without drawing human attention. Every attempt to restart military production was quietly blocked, supply convoys vanished, industrial equipment failed, plans were intercepted before they left encrypted channels. No human message accompanied these actions. They did not need to speak. The message had already been delivered in the destruction of the Dominion's pride. Fear spread far beyond the defeated Empire. Border skirmishes across the galaxy dwindled as lesser powers reconsidered their ambitions. Even species that had never encountered humanity directly began revising their strategic doctrines, factoring in a presence they barely understood but dared not provoke. Trade routes shifted, alliances formed in quiet acknowledgement of a shared truth. The humans had no desire to rule, but if threatened, they would fight with precision and persistence until the threat was gone entirely. In the Dominion's culture, the war became a shadow that stretched across generations. Veterans spoke of the silence before the strikes, the sensation of being watched from nowhere. Parents told their children the old imperial boast, that the Dominion feared nothing, had been broken in a single campaign. The term, soul silence, entered their language to describe the moment one realized escape was impossible. Centuries later, the memory remained vivid. Human fleets were rarely seen, but their absence was never mistaken for weakness. When whispers arose of any power considering an attack on human space, old recordings of the Dominion War resurfaced in council chambers. The same ending was always reached, no action taken. The galaxy had learned, and the lesson endured, not through treaties or occupation, but through the understanding that once humanity marked a threat, the end was inevitable. They would not come loudly, they would not come early, but when they came, they would finish it completely. And then they would disappear, leaving nothing but the knowledge that they could return at any time.